exciting topic, the future of Islam. Recently, only about 2 weeks ago, I was by chance, not that this is my topic, but by chance I was at a conference at Harvard, a conference given by Shahab Ahmed, who's a professor of Islamic history at the university. And the topic of his lecture was, "What is Islam?" And he began with an anecdote, which I want to share with you. And he didn't mention the particular names in the anecdote. So we have two persons. One is a very famous living philosopher, and the other from the UK, from Oxford, and the other is a well-known Islamic scholar at Princeton University. And they're sitting next to each other at a faculty dinner, and the Islamic scholar is having some wine. So the Oxford professor asks the Islamic scholar, "Excuse me, I know it's a personal question, but you're Muslim, aren't you?" He says, "Yes." "But you're drinking wine." He says, "Yes." "But, how's that possible?" "Well," he says, "my father and my grandfather, and before that my great-great-grandfather, we've been Muslims for 1,000 years, and they've always drunk wine, to the best of my knowledge." And the Oxford philosopher says, "I don't understand." And the Islamic scholar says, "I do." And then Shahab Ahmed went on to say that Islam from the outside seems, and from the inside as well, a system of dual norms that can be in conflict with each other and have been in conflict with each other, but it has gone along century after century. So the gist of this discussion, the reason why I come up with this anecdote, of course, the gist of this discussion is not for us to discuss what is Islam and what is not Islam, but the past and the future of Islam in society, I think, as we see it, not to interpret the holy books. And when thinking of the future, what comes to my mind, of course, the future of some religions anyway, is immortality. And the concept of heaven, perhaps. And briefly looking at the concept of heaven in many religions, we look at Greek mythology, the Elysian fields exist, but we really don't know too much about it. It's only a place. In Egypt, ancient Egypt, we have the Book of the Dead, which shows the magic that you can use to get to heaven, but the heaven is more or less like what was happening before, to the best of our knowledge. With Buddhist and Chinese, with Buddhist and Hindu, it's more or less a circular path, unless you become enlightened and you're sort of observing from the outside. Jewish religion, in Judaism also, heaven is mentioned, but we really don't have very much a definite idea of heaven. It's only when we come to Islam and Christianity that there's a very strong concept of heaven. And my personal take on heaven is that it's an insult to the human species, because it's such a place, because we were originally punished when we were in the Garden of Eden, according to the books, originally punished because we ate the fruit of knowledge, and we came to earth to work. We were punished to work by the sweat of our brow. As we were doing that, we wrote books, we created cathedrals, mosques, temples. We created. And once, when we go to heaven, creation stops again. We have nothing to do. We cannot even write in heaven. And we, as writers, presumably want to continue to write, if we want to. So my first question I want to bring up for our discussion is, do we want to go to heaven, basically? What is the future of heaven for Islam, and is Islam against, not Islam, is heaven against the freedom to write?
I think we first need to look in the past. As you all know, for centuries, the doctrine of the Prophet has been true everywhere in the world, starting in India, going down to France. Over the 300 centuries, over the 3 centuries, other cultures had, thanks to Byzantine rulers, different texts translated. And all of a sudden, this culture started losing its power, its strength. And there is one thing that should be noted in this context, and that is the work of Imre Hardun. When in Tunisia and Egypt last year we saw the first signs of unrest, I was reading his book and I felt that this was the best explanation of what was going on then, because he saw decadence of the Arab regimes in Arab rulers who were trying to occupy different territories, who were then taken by the form of life full of luxury. And this led to decadence. And this is something we can see in Egypt, we can see it in Tunisia. So the description of this situation was excellent. And I thought that this was exactly what I was seeing last year happening. What I want to say is that during all these centuries, we have seen what I would call historical holiday. During the Ottoman regime, and then during the 18th century, when we had the colonial powers of Anglo-Saxon countries occupying countries including Iran, we saw a lot of resistance in these countries. So looking at Algeria, for example, if you look at the resistance coming from Algeria, if you look at the most important intellectual of the 19th century, we would see that we did see certain signs of resistance in different countries, but this was not what you would call intense resistance. And then after the fall of the Ottoman regime, when Mustafa Kemal appears, then all of a sudden this idea of nationalism appears as well. We see Amrin Khattavi, for example, in Morocco, who was a warrior originally from Rif, who defeated the Spaniards. France and Spain at that time, by using toxic gases during those wars, and this fighter also was killed during the war. Then later we saw the phenomenon of independence occurring, and in this we see two poles. In fact, on the one hand we have the left-wing parties, and we have on the other hand also conservative parties. This is particularly true of Saudi Arabia, for example. And I think that it is important to say that Europe has never helped Arab Democrats, unlike, for example, the dissidents from the Soviet bloc. At that time, we had an active system of assistance, but Arab Democrats could never rely on support from the West.
Yeah. At first, what I'm speaking about, it will not be the concept of Islam and Egyptian culture. I think what is very deep in Egyptian people is the idea of God. It's not the idea of Islam as a religion, but the idea of God. And I think that the Egyptian people cannot live without this perception of God, not the perception or Islam as a religion. And another thing which is very important for them is the concept and the practice of creation. So
The concept of
creation,
creation.
to create something. So they create their own perspective to Islam, their own understanding of Islam. It's not like what comes from Saudi Arabia to Egypt just 1,000 years ago. And for Egyptian people, it's very short time. So Islam in Egypt has its own character, its own practice too, and it's not so strange for the Egyptian to drink wine, to smoke hashish, to go to the mosque in the morning, and to go to the bar at night or to go to the nightclub. So the concept of Islam in Egypt is very special thing because I think, and most of Egyptians think that it is very open to others, and it is the character of Egypt as a geography place, as a civilization. And what you mentioned, what I said in this interview, it reflected the struggle between creation, the concept, which is very important to Egyptian guys, and the conception of Islam. My family, the member of most of the member of my family are somehow fundamentalists. Yeah, and they make formal things, and at the same time, me, I represent the concept of creation.
Yes.
So we can live together, but we have some problems. Yeah, I think it is now in Egypt. It can reflect the big question about Islam in Egypt now, especially in the revolution, and you can see that in the political reality, the place of Muslim Brotherhood and Salafis, and on the other side, the place of left-wing artists and liberals guys. So I think it's a big question of the character of Egypt, especially after the revolution.
For instance, Turkey, until about, I'm from Istanbul, until about 10, 15 years ago, Turkey used to be called Turkey or a NATO country in the Western Alliance. In the past 10 years or so, Turkey is now referred to as an Islamic country. All of a sudden, Turkey became an Islamic country. The population did not change. More or less the same political parties are there, although they change. Some get elected, some don't get elected, but it's an Islamic country. Why is not, and when you name countries with adjectives like that, it poses an opposition to the other. Why is not Japan called a Buddhist country? Why is not Paraguay a Christian country? Do we have to be referred as Islamic writers? And they often are. Islamic, for instance, I've seen in Islam for Dummies, the book, Najib Mahfouz was referred to as an Islamic writer. You're not called a Christian writer. Maybe you have no religion, but they wouldn't know. On the basis of your Christian name, you're not called a Christian. How can we get rid of these labels that we can just become writers? Can we?
I'd like to refer to a regime that was no different from any theocracy. My experience is that gaining freedom is always a painful way, painful experience, but you cannot satanize Islam on the grounds that Europe is guilty in making Islam backward and making that something irrefutable. That's impossible. Europeans have always supported dictatorships. They've never supported democratic regimes. At the moment, more than 40% of Muslims are illiterate. If you look at the most prestigious universities worldwide, Only 2 of them are in Malaysia, and there are very few of them in all the other Arab countries. So there's been a decline in education in Muslim countries, and Europe is not supporting education there, despite of the fact that people there are fighting for freedom, for democracy. That's something that we have to be aware of, and the price is being paid by Europe, that Europe did not interfere into the horrible acts taking place in Bosnia, for example, during the war. If you see the way in which an open Muslim community, which was subjected to bombing by barbarians who walked under the banner of patriots, and yet Europe did not help, did not raise a hand to help. If those under siege were Christians, the siege would not last for more than a month. But the fact that those under siege were Muslims, something that was perceived as a bridge towards understanding, was completely suppressed in a horrible way by countries like France, the UK, etc. So I believe that we have to support the struggle of people in Arab countries who fight for the freedom of expression. They certainly deserve our support.